transferring real estate. Chapter 10, Giving Up or Losing Property. In this chapter, checking out ways to give up your property voluntarily, discovering how others, including nature, can take away your property, understanding what happens to your property after you die. Chapter 10, Giving Up or Losing Property. In addition to simply selling it to someone who wants to buy it, property can be conveyed or transferred voluntarily through a number of means. Property can also be lost involuntarily through the force of nature, law, or the government. And finally, in fact, very final property is transferred after you die. In this chapter, I discuss a number of the more common ways that property can be conveyed and lost involuntarily. In your real estate practice, you may never encounter or be involved with most of these issues. They do, however, involve real estate. And as a real estate agent, you need to know something about them. Equally as important, state exam writers expect you to know something about the various ways property can be transferred or lost. Fine by me, giving up property voluntarily. Most of the time, title to property or the ownership of property is conveyed or transferred voluntarily from one owner to another, which is the transaction formerly known as voluntary alienation. Among the ways this kind of transfer can be accomplished are dedication, gifts, public grants, and sales. I explain these methods in the sections that follow. Exam questions tend to be definitional, using short cases to get the right answer out of you. All of government, dedication. Dedication is a term used for a specific type of voluntary transfer of property from the individual to the government. You may well ask why anyone would want to voluntarily give their property to the government. Dedication typically refers to the process by which the developer transfers ownership of the land that are needed for roads, sewers, water lines, and other utilities to the government as part of land development. A person who subdivides a large piece of property into smaller residential lots for sale may build a road as the individual lots are sold. At some point, the developer turns title to the government, creating a public street. Dedications may also include easements that the municipalities may need, such as getting to drainage ditch for maintenance. Check out Chapter 8 for more about easements. Individual property owners, as opposed to developers, can also dedicate land to the municipalities, such as land for the roads to allow access to a town park. Governments vary in the ways they view and treat this type of dedication. They often decide how to deal with dedication on a project-by-project basis. A local government may require a subdivision street to be dedicated, but prefer the internal roads of the condominium development to remain privately owned, so the government, is not responsible for maintenance. Although not technically viewed as a gift, see the next section, generally no consideration or thing of value is given by the government in return for the dedicated land. From me to you, gifts. You know what a gift is, right? Think about Christmas and your birthday. Property can convey simply by giving it to someone. A deed is executed to convey title, but the main difference in a gift situation as opposed to a sale is that no money or other things of value, usually called consideration, is in exchange for the property. In all other respects, the conveyances by the deed is the same. I discussed deeds in Chapter 9. A threat from Uncle Sam, public grants. A treat from Uncle Sam, public grants. Public grants, sometimes simply called grants, can all transfer of property in which the government gives a piece of property to someone. In years past, when the federal government wanted to settle a new part of the country, it simply gave grants of land to people who agreed to settle in that location. Some of your ancestors may have received grants, or else you may be living on a piece of property that was once part of a public grant. The usual way sounds representing someone in the sale or purchase of a property is, of course, where you make your money as a real estate agent. A sale typically involves a grantor, the person selling the property, and a grantee, the person buying the property, and a deed, the document that transfers title. I discussed the requirements for a valid deed and different types of deeds in Chapter 9. One important concept in a deed for sale of property is the consideration, the exchange of money or something else of value in exchange for the property, characterized a conveyance of property as a sale rather than something else, such as a gift. By force, losing property involuntarily. Sometimes your property can be taken against your wishes, or for some other reason, it can be lost. These types of situations generally are known as involuntary alienation. I go over the principal forms of involuntary alienation: adverse possession, evasion and erosion, eminent domain, foreclosures, forfeitures, and partitions. In this section, questions on voluntary alienation will most likely be definition. So remember the chief characteristics of each form. It's really mine. Adverse possession. Adverse possession is a loss of property or some rights to your property because of a continued use by someone else. The original owner can lose complete title, ownership to the property, or only a right to use a part of the property, such as an easement called a prescriptive easement, or an easement by prescription. The basic premise of adverse possession is that someone other than the owner uses the pieces of the property openly, public, and without the owner's consent for a specified period of time. The conditions necessarily to claim ownership under adverse possession are actual possession. To gain possession, someone has to occupy the property. Adverse possession, someone subserves the real owner's right of ownership. Claim of ownership, someone lays claim to the property. Continuous use, someone uses the property without interruption. Hostile, someone claims the property after using it without the owner's consent. Notorious, someone exerts possession that is a secret but rather is well known to other people. Open, someone uses the property is visible and obvious to everyone viewing the property. In addition, anyone who claims title by adverse possession must do everything required by law during a specific time period. The law governs adverse possessions vary from one state to the next. When calculating the length of time someone other than the owner uses the property to claim adverse possession, a concept known as tacking comes into play. Tacking is the ability of a party claiming possession to count or accumulate the necessary amount of time of possession during the ownership of more than one owner. Say, for example, that 3 different people each occupy a property for 6 years. Each of the adverse possession situation, the state in which the property is located requires a minimum of 15 years occupancy to claim title to the property. The adversary claims ownership right can rely on adverse taking place during the previous occupant's ownership to accumulate the required 15 years. Check out the length of time of continuous use that your state requires for someone to claim title by adverse possession. Although I didn't claim to know how specific laws in every state, among the ones I do know, the time requirement for adverse possession can range from as little as 3 years up to 30 years. Individual states may also have variations on the requirements for adverse possession that I listed. It's unlikely that you will be tested on anything very specific other than the number of years required. But if you're ever involved in an adverse possession situation, it would be helpful to research your state's laws. Being awarded title through the claim of adverse possession is not automatic. The person claiming the title must file a lawsuit or otherwise initiate actions to quiet title in court. If the quiet title action is successful, the person is awarded title to the property. An easement by prescription may also be claimed through an adverse use of the property. For example, someone driving over a part of your property every day for a statutory period of time can eventually claim the right to drive across the property forever. It's successful in legal actions that persons can be awarded an easement, which is the right to use the property in a specific way as opposed to complete ownership. See Chapter 8 for details on easements. And just in case you have your eye on a few feet of that park behind your house, most states have rules exempting government land from adverse possession. You can't fight nature. Effusions and erosions. Mother Nature definitely is a powerful force. Even in a world of real estate, she could take away your land in a couple of different ways. Effusion is a sudden loss of land that occurs by nature possesses it. Earthquakes, landslides, and mudslides are examples of nature's forces that can remove land involuntarily. Erosion is a loss of land through a gradual process and wearing away of land by the actions of a river or ocean is an example of erosion. The opposite of losing land by nature possession is accretion, or granting land by nature's forces. One form of accretion describes gaining property by the natural actions of water. Sand added to a beach or soil deposits by a river are examples of otherwise known as avulsion or effusion is something described in this effusion soil. We need that. Please, eminent domain. Eminent domain is the taking of land against your wishes by the government or by other public agencies such as a public water district or certain private corporations such as utility companies for public purposes. In addition to the requirements that the land is used for a public purpose, the owner of the property must receive fair compensation. An authority taking possession must follow due process or the prescribed legal requirements necessary to take the property. I discuss eminent domain and control of land use in Chapter 8. Deep in debt, foreclosures. Foreclosures is loss of property involuntarily to pay a debt. The most common type of foreclosures are the result of an unpaid mortgage loan or unpaid property tax. Failing to pay back borrowed money or taxes in a timely manner can result in a foreclosure. The lender of a community to whom the debt is owed involuntarily initiates foreclosure proceedings in court. These proceedings enable the lender or local unit of government to sell the property and collect the unpaid debt from the proceeds of the sale. In most places, homeowners associations also have the right to foreclose on a property because of unpaid association dues or common charges. I discuss foreclosures that result from unpaid mortgage loans in Chapter 15. I cover the sale of property for unpaid taxes in Chapter 16. Ignoring the rules. Forfeiture. You also lose your title to your property by disobeying some condition of the deed, such as using the property for something the deed forbids, or not using it for purpose required in the deed. For example, I've seen properties that were donated to municipalities for the use of parks returned for their donors for failure to abide by the deed. Conditions limiting the use of the property can also be written into the deed. If a municipality ever uses the property for any other purpose, the person who donated the property or the person's family or estate can demand through a court action that the property be returned. Making a split. Partitioning. Partitioning is a legal proceeds that is undertaken to divide a single piece of property that is owned in shares in undivided ownership by two or more people. For more about the concept of undivided ownership, see Chapter 7. Two people together own one piece of property with two vacation homes is a good example. One owner wants to rent out both units and the other wants to use the unit. If the pair can't agree on how to use the property or how to divide it, one can file petition proceedings asking the court to physically divide the property so that each party can own a piece of it. If for some reason the property can't be divided, the courts may order the parties to sell the property and divide the proceeds from the sales in proportion known according to the respective interests in a property of the two owners. Losing property. Very involuntary, passing title after passing away. You may well wonder why the subject of wills and passing title to the property after death is a subject that the state examiners want you to know something about. After all, wills and estates are subject to better left to attorneys and to the courts, right? Although this is true, real estate agents often are called in to help sell a property that's left in someone else's estate. Familiarity with some of the terminologies and issues that can arise is important. Exam questions focus on very basic information about wills, laws of descent or inheritance, and probate. Where there's a will, there are heirs and relatives. A will is a document that demonstrates how a deceased person's real estate and the rights to go with it, the person's property, items not permanently attached to real estate, are to distributed after death. The person for whom the will is drafted is called a testator. Up to the time of death, the testator can dispose of the property even if it is mentioned in the will. A will takes effect only after death. Anyone who receives title to real estate through a will is known as a deceased. The gift of real property is called a devise. And additionally, or a change to an existing will made by the person for whom the will was written is called a codicil. Where there is no will, there still may be heirs and relatives, laws of descent. When someone dies without a will, intestate, he or she will still have heirs, or people who are entitled to inherit assets from the estate. Someone who dies with a will has died testate. A good way to remember the difference between testate and intestate is a shorter word than without, and testate is a shorter word than intestate. Someone who dies with a will dies testate. Someone who dies without a will dies intestate. Every state has laws of descent, a statute of descent, and sometimes a law of descent and this distribution covering the distribution of the assets of real estate when a deceased has no will. Spouses, children, and probably other relatives are entitled to a portion of the assets of the estate by virtue of their relationship to the deceased. If your state exam requires you to know about the subject involuntary loss of property, check out the law of descent in your state. And if your state specifically wants you to know something about the laws of descent, make sure that at least understanding the basics of who would get what from an estate if there's no will. When people die without a will or without heirs, the state can't claim the asset in a state by something called escheats. For more about escheats, check Chapter 8. The court has its say, probate. Probate is the process of making sure that the will is legal and valid. The deceased wishes are carried out, and the asset actually are in the estate. In the case of someone who dies intestate, the courts determine who inherits the asset of the estate based on the laws of descent. See the previous section. Both processes take place in a surrogate court, which is sometimes referred to as probate court. Analogy that may help you remember the name of a surrogate court is the surrogate mother, who simply is someone standing in for the real mother. Surrogate courts means the court stands in the place of the deceased. During probate proceedings, the court appoints an executor of the estate to carry out the actual distribution of the assets. The executor usually is named in the will. In law of the individual state's government, probates proceedings. Generally, probates take place in the country where the deceased person lived, and it may take place in the country where he or she owned property, and different from the country of residence. And that was part 3. It's all mine, owning and transferring real estate. Chapter 10, giving up or losing property. Thank you.